So Caroline Duffy's Prayer, final poem in the Meantime collection, and placed where it is in the collection, we can only assume that it's there right at the end to give an extra sense of significance and resonance as we close the pages on this volume. We know from a poem like Confession that Duffy herself isn't religious. She's had the religion pretty much terrified out of her, that poem makes clear. But clearly the religious reflex, the instinct for religion, and the consolations and the ritual of prayer itself is still something that is alive and living within her. Duffy, we know, is a poet who is often quite undisciplined in her sense of poetic forms and verse structures and rhyme, but here she is very tightly controlled, using one of the most traditional poetic forms of all, the Shakespearean sonnet, meaning we have 4 quatrains rhyming AB or AB, followed by a closing rhyming couplet. Now, the Shakespearean sonnet is a form most often famously associated with love poetry. But this isn't a poem about love as such, not explicitly in that romantic sense of the word anyway, but it is a poem about ritual, and the form of the poem itself becomes a form of ritual, a form of devotion. It is a poem that is rich with antithesis. The opening stanza begins "some days," while the second stanza contrasts that with "some nights." In that first stanza, Duffy confronts, from the very beginning, that sense of the way that religion has escaped us. She says, "Although we cannot pray, a prayer utters itself." So the instinct, the reflex, is something that rises up almost unbidden within us. We cannot control it. And note the first person plural, universalising that loss of faith, as if it's something not just Duffy experiences, but something that's native to all of us in this contemporary society of 1993, when this poem this volume was collected together and published. In the first stanza, a woman will lift her head from the sieve of her hands, that metaphor of the sieve of her hands really capturing the sense of someone who life is draining through, someone who's been depleted, and yet life offers her a sudden gift. And that's what this poem shows us, that the consolations of religion can be found in the beauty of the external world if we just kind of open our, sounds a bit soppy and sentimental, but if we just open our heads and our hearts to it. She stirs at the minims sung by a tree. The senses all fuse into one. She stirs and yet she hears. The bird song within the tree becomes a part of the tree itself. A really beautiful image that Duffy uses there. Although we are faithless, we're told in the second stanza, and we're not exactly sure in what way we are faithless. Is it the lack of religious faith? Is it in the sense of relationships, of betrayals? We know there are many betrayals captured in the poems like Disgrace. Or is it in the general sense that we've lost faith in ourselves, in our identities, in who we are? We're not exactly sure. But the truth unbidden enters our hearts. That small, familiar pain. Again, an image that can't help, like many lines in this poem, give us a striking echo of Philip Larkin's verse and the attitudes and tones within it. A man, contrasting the woman in the opening stanza, will stand stock still, hearing his youth in the distant Latin chanting of a train. Trains, Larkin, you can see lots of familiar images shuffle past here. We also can't help but feel an echo of the figure in captain of the 1964 top of the form team, with his declension of those Latin verbs. Is he the kind of person that hears the chanting of the youth in the chanting of the train? On to stanza 3, and it opens with an imperative. Pray for us now. Again, not exactly clear who Duffy is calling on to offer this prayer for us, but there is that sense of pleading, a sense of quiet desperation and sadness within this poem. Like it does often in Larkin, it is music that offers consolation here. Grade 1 piano scales console the lodger looking out across a Midlands town. An image that, we get a splash of Mr. Bleeny there, we get a couple of drops of talking in beds and the dark towns that heap up on the horizon. The image of the lodger, of course, offering us that sense of insecurity, that sense of impermanence, a sense that we aren't properly fixed down and rooted in society. And that, again, an idea that spreads throughout this collection, that somehow society has shaken so many people loose and we find it hard to put secure roots back down. Then dusk, time moves on. Someone calls a child's name as though they named their loss. Now, here's an image. It's a familiar image in one sense. A parent who just opens the back door or the front door, shouts their child's name for them to come in. It's getting bedtime, it's getting dark, come in and, get off the streets and get ready for bed. And yet there's something more here. There's the linking of childhood and loss that again echoes down from captain of the 1964 top of the form team. And, from a poem like Stafford Afternoons, where childhood is freighted with darkness, freighted with sadness and pathos and poignancy and, and other words meaning sad and dark and, a little bit morbid and depressing. And then on to the final couplet. Darkness outside. This darkness outside immediately juxtaposed with inside, that sense of antithesis that runs through the poem again. The radio's prayer. And of course the speaker, the persona in the poem, is listening to the shipping forecast, that famous litany itself, that famous secular poem that offers a sense of solace, a sense of security, a sense of guidance and safety. Again, I'll give you a list of synonyms there. In it, we get Rockall, Marlin, Dogger, Finisterre. Bit of googling told me that Finisterre is no longer actually used in the shipping forecast. Hasn't been since about 2002, I think it was. But Finisterre, the final word in the collection, and a word meaning the end of the earth. So one that is, profoundly significant word with which to end this particular collection of poems. So it's a prayer, but it's a secular prayer. Religion isn't there, but the instinct, the need to be comforted, to find some kind of security is definitely there. If you're doing the Educast paper and you're looking for connections with Philip Larkin poems, you'll find a similar exploration of that religious instinct, of course, in Faith Healing. You'll find the consolations of music in Sidney Bechet. You'll find that sort of rootlessness, that temporary, insecure way in which the world has gone in Mr. Bleeny. If you are thinking about for the Educast paper, you're thinking AO3 and you're thinking about context, you've got this poem reflecting that general shift away from religion. We're looking at a post-religious age here, into a more, a very secular, not just a more, but almost totally secular society, but one in which the ghosts of religious need haven't quite been vanquished, and there is still this instinct within us, an instinct to prayer. And of course, the key, one of the big AO3 things you've got to explore in this poem is the fact that Shakespeare has taken on that most traditional of poetic forms, the Shakespearean sonnet, not to write a poem about love, but to write a poem about ritual. And you could say that the form itself is part of a ritual. That poetic form itself lends a sense of, I think, gravitas, and I'd even say a tiny bit of grandeur to this poem, which, like I say, ends the collection. So there we have it, Carol Ann Duffy's Prayer. See you soon.